Well, like many of you, I've been dismayed at the loss of a collective moral compass when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war. That so many of our left-wing intelligentsia and even amongst our Muslim population think that Israel, not Hamas, are the bad guys deeply disturbs me. Our university vice-chancellors seem to have no knowledge of history, let alone of just war theory, that they have nothing of value to impart to the ignorant and confused student protesters encamped in their quadrangles. It's why I've been wanting for some time to speak on this program to my next guest. Dr. David Adler is no stranger to regular ADH TV viewers and indeed anyone who follows the news. He's a popular commentator and writer on a range of political issues. He's the president of the Australian Jewish Association and he joins me now. David, thanks so much for your time. What has happened to Australia's moral compass?
Look, it's very distressing, Lyle, and you know, it's been said for some time that there's been a long march of the left through the institutions, and perhaps more than any other event, the events arising out of the 7th of October and the subsequent reactions have brought this to the surface. But I think it's a little broader than that. And some people have said this is actually a civilizational battle. And if you are of the view, as I suspect you are, that Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian ethics, whether you're religious or not, that is the case. And if you are an advocate of an ideology that is opposed to Western civilization, such as the various isms, socialism, communism, Islamism, then almost reflexly you're going to be anti-Israel, because both the Judeo and Christian side of that formula began in the land of Israel. So I actually think there's something quite deep and something quite profound being played out here, and that is the tension between the ideologies of socialism, communism, Islamism versus the ideology of Western civilization based on Judeo-Christian ethics. And that's the loss of moral compass, because Western civilization gets its moral compass from the Judeo-Christian ethics.
No, that's exactly right. And I know you'd agree that another ism is cultural Marxism, which of course is the dominant ideology on our university campuses. But when we lose our moral compass, of course, we lose our way and confusion ensues. And this was highlighted to me this week by a supporter who's on my email list. Her name is Karen. She emailed me this yesterday and said, "Dear Lyle, I agree and support most things that you say to believe in. However, your support for Israel, who are murdering," she writes, "murdering thousands of people is so unbelievable. It's hard to believe that you and your party do not see that this war is all about money and Israel having the Gaza Strip to build their gasoline and make millions of dollars." End quote from Karen. David, why is it so hard for people like Karen to understand that Hamas's battle tactics are built around using civilians as human shields for what is obviously the more important war to them, and that is the propaganda war?
Look, we're outnumbered. We're outnumbered 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1. I've got no idea of what the ratio is. And unfortunately, there is a Goering principle of propaganda that if you say a lie often enough, people believe it. Now, on the 6th of October, there had been a prolonged ceasefire. Israel had no interest in doing anything with Gaza, but that was all broken on the 7th of October, and it was broken by Hamas with their supporters, Palestinian Islamic Jihad and some other terrorist groups who did the most barbaric terrorism and killed the most Jews in one day since the Holocaust. Israel has no interest in the sort of things that she's been talking about, nor is it murder, nor is it indiscriminate. And indeed, we currently have in Australia Colonel Richard Kemp, who's the former commander of British forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, an expert on military conflicts in the Middle East. And he has said that what Israel has achieved in low civilian casualties in complex urban warfare has never been achieved before. Hamas say there has been 30-something thousand deaths. Maybe their information is correct, maybe it isn't. But assume for a moment it is correct, then Israel says that they have eliminated something between 13 and 15,000 terrorist combatants. So you've got to deduct from that number. Plus, there have been a lot of people killed by Hamas, either unintentionally, because 20% of their rockets roughly misfire and fall within Gaza, killing people, or they have used people as human shields intentionally and also murdered some of their own. So it's estimated that the civilian to combatant ratio is less than 1-to-1. In other operations in Afghanistan and in Iraq, it was between 3 and 5-to-1. And in some other battles, it has been as high as 9-to-1. Never before has such a low civilian casualty been achieved in complex warfare. So, unfortunately, your correspondent, Karen, has consumed the anti-Israel propaganda Kool-Aid, which has very little resemblance to the facts on the ground.
Yes, no, well, thank you for breaking that down so clearly, those statistics. Obviously, any deaths are absolutely regrettable. No one wants to see civilians being killed in war, least of all the IDF. But I know that since the start of the war, and this is not widely reported, the IDF warned civilians to move out of these battle zones, essentially, telegraphing their battle tactics, which of course gives you a massive disadvantage. And yet we still read in the Australian newspaper, which is a newspaper I have high regard for, it quotes that 30,000 figure all the time and then usually says, and the majority of these are women and children. If we can't even get the Australian newspaper to report what you've just said, no wonder people like Karen are confused.
Yeah, and there have been a number of statisticians actually that have analysed the casualty reports from Hamas and have said that it's statistically impossible because the way that they've racked it up in various reports in a perfectly linear manner when it's graphed, and the way that they've claimed a certain proportion of women and children, it's statistically impossible to achieve what they say has happened in warfare. It doesn't happen. It's got very little, basically zero credibility.
Yep. Well, they're certainly winning that propaganda war, and we're seeing this obviously here in Australia with the protests. Since October 9, when Hamas supporters shamefully rioted on the steps of the Opera House, quoting a number of terrible chants, but one of which still remains in vogue, the River to the Sea chant that's echoed through our streets and university campuses. Yet the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has only just this week condemned it. Here he is being interviewed by prominent Jewish Australian and former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg.
The issue of the River to the Sea, Dennis Richardson again described it as an extremely violent statement. And so it has no place on our streets.
I agree.
Now, David, why did it take so long for Anthony Albanese to condemn this vile chant?
Well, I would be one of the last people who could explain the thinking of Anthony Albanese or why it's taken so long. But it is a failure of leadership, without a doubt. Some people say that he has been extremely weak on the subject, and I think that's actually being generous. There's also been some analysis published in your esteemed newspaper, The Australian, I don't know, about 6 weeks ago, that showed the number of Labor seats in which the Muslim vote is highly influential. There are 29 seats where the Muslim population is 5% or more. 27 of those seats are being held by Labor at the moment, but some of them are being targeted by the Greens. So one hypothesis has been that Labor has been very reluctant to speak out clearly on issues concerning Israel, concerning anti-Semitism, concerning the Jewish community broadly, so as not to upset the Muslim voting base. And as unpleasant as it might seem, I am of the view now that that is influential. And we see it in another senior member of the Labor Party, the Minister for Education, Jason Clare, has the electorate of Blaxland. Blaxland has roughly 35% Muslims in its voting electorate. And maybe that explains why the Minister for Education, whose portfolio includes responsibility for what happens on the tertiary education campuses, universities are largely funded federally, he's done nothing. He's done nothing effective. He's made, a few statements of platitudes, but nothing on the ground. So I think there's a number of influences here in the mix, and we really need the federal government to properly step up and not just make some vague comments that this is unacceptable or that's unacceptable or I agree or disagree, but we need proper action and policy on the ground, on the university campuses, red lines. We don't want to see things deteriorate to what's occurred on some of the United States college campuses where there's been major violent clashes and, special force type police have had to be called in to break things up. So let's fix things in Australia before it deteriorates further. I think it's gone too far already.
Yeah, it's very concerning what you mentioned about the Muslim constituency, particularly here in Western Sydney, and obviously very influential in Melbourne as well and other major cities in Australia. If this constituency is driving the political approach and our foreign policy even towards one of our greatest allies, Israel, this is very worrying. I'm a Democrat. I do believe in government of the people, by the people, for the people, but the mob doesn't always get it right, and that's where leadership's important, because if we're allowing chants like River to the Sea, which is a genocidal chant, allowing people to have misconceptions about the justness of the war, and this is not being corrected, that puts the nation in a very dangerous position, doesn't it?
Well, if you want to learn the lessons of history, Lyle, you can find many examples where anti-Semitism, a rise of anti-Semitism, is an indicator of a decline of a society. There are ancient examples, the great empires like the Roman Empire or the Spanish Empire. When they turned on their Jewish populations, there was a decline rapidly, and those empires are no longer with us. Modern examples would be the former Soviet Union, with its pogroms and suppression of the practice of Judaism, through to, of course, Nazi Germany as the ultimate modern example, and the 1,000-year Reich, so-called, was eliminated in a few years, thank God. And I don't want to see the decline of Western civilization. I hope that most Australians value Western democracy, but unless there's proper leadership that sets values, principles, direction for the country, then there is some decline underway at the moment. It's probably not beyond the point of no return, but it does need
getting close.
Good leadership at the top.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really shocked, David, because if you look at Hollywood, even the streaming services like Netflix, there's a plethora of movies that are about what happened in Nazi Germany, World War II, and you know, for the most part, I think really, really good. And we've had a whole generation raised on this as entertainment and educative, you know, drama through film, and yet the lessons that have been taught through Hollywood, in this case, I would say good lessons, a lot of bad lessons taught through Hollywood, but in the case of the history of what happened through Nazi Germany, good lessons, and yet that hasn't meant anything for these young people on our university campuses. I'm amazed and shocked, as
You're
you
right.
must be.
Well, we've had a couple of Holocaust survivors approach us and say that they are seeing the same sentiments today being played out. And that includes the harassment and intimidation of Jewish students on university campuses. There have been examples of physical blockage of Jewish students and staff on university campuses. Exclusion. There are Jewish students today who have been advised in Australia to do the learning remote rather than turn up to the university campuses and sit in lecture theatres because they're at risk if they do that. Now, these things are completely un-Australian, but they are happening on our university campuses right now.
I think someone should go and set up a big video screen in the quadrangle of Sydney University and show reruns of Schindler's List. But David, just on to, I guess, the battle tactics now. We've got the IDF now wanting to go into, or going into Rafah to try and clean up the rest of these Hamas battalions, these evil terrorists that are hiding there amongst civilians. Now, Penny Wong has been giving the IDF military advice on how to deal with this terrorist organisation and has pledged to repeat the brutal rapes and killings of innocent people. Here's Penny Wong.
The Australian government's grave concerns about an impending major Israeli ground offensive in Rafah. This would bring further devastation to more than 1 million civilians seeking shelter in Rafah, many there by Israel's direction. Large-scale military operations in densely populated areas risks extensive civilian casualties. Australia believes this would be unjustifiable. Our message to Israel is listen to the world, do not go down this path.
Now, if the IDF takes Penny Wong's advice and leaves Hamas intact in Rafah, what happens?
Look, I'll give you an analogy which was told to me recently that's quite a good analogy. Just suppose your house is on fire and you've got a hose to put out the fire. Do you put out 50%, 70%, 80% of the flames, or do you need to put out all the flames? And the obvious answer is you need to complete the job and put out all the flames. Well, Israel's facing something way worse than a house fire, and it needs to deal with it fully. And Penny Wong's comments are completely naive and to the point of being reckless and disgraceful. And I'll give you just 2 comments further. It's easy to sit comfortably in Australia and throw criticisms at Israel, but she has never, ever suggested an alternate or better plan. If you think what Israel is doing is wrong, then what would be your plan for getting rid of Hamas? What would be your plan for the complex urban warfare that involves human shields, terrorists, tunnels, etc.? And I know that that question has been put numerous times around the world to military experts or politicians who throw criticisms. No one has given a satisfactory response that provides a better plan than what Israel is doing. And the second comment, can I just make one more comment? And that's Egypt. There are 2 borders with Gaza. One is Israel and the other is Egypt. And you never hear criticism of Egypt. It would be very easy to move civilians into parts of the Sinai Peninsula or into Egypt proper. But Egypt has locked up their border tighter than Israel, and they have recently communicated with some of the Bedouin tribes in the Sinai to make sure that no people are allowed to flee from Gaza. So if your interest is in protecting civilians, there are a variety of potential solutions. Israel's doing the best it can with the limitations in place. And Penny Wong's comments are totally unhelpful.
Yeah, so what I can ascertain, and you've got to read deeply and in various places to find this out, but it seems Israel is communicating to the civilian population, we're about to launch a military operation, here's a humanitarian zone, go there. So there's no reason why any Gazan should find themselves in harm's way. Am I correct in that? It's not a case of Israel just bulldozing in with their tanks and rockets and bombs into civilian areas. People are given plenty of warning. So why is all this focus on Israel being on the wrong side of this when they are trying to protect the civilian population?
Well, I mean, if you look at the actual data and compare it to other urban warfare conflicts, and there have been articles and written on this analysis as well, Israel has achieved a remarkably low civilian casualty rate. Yes, it's always tragic, but we have another factor operating here which adds to the complexity, and that is Hamas does everything it can to prevent the civilians moving into the safe areas. So Israel has announced that it's going to commence its operations, has commenced its operations on the eastern side of Rafah. It's created an expanded humanitarian area on the western side, which includes temporary tent accommodation, food, medical supplies, really more than any country has ever done to look after enemy population, if you like, in inverted commas. But it's a tough environment. It really is. You've got Egypt being totally uncooperative. You've got Hamas trying to inhibit the humanitarian efforts, and Israel doing the best it can, meanwhile having the objective that it needs to get rid of the Hamas terrorists in the large major stronghold.
David, is the civilian population in Gaza, are they largely on the side of Hamas?
Unfortunately, yes. There has been 2 generations now totally brainwashed with what in the West would be called radicalisation, in part thanks to UNRWA and
that's the United Nations.
The United Nations Relief and Work Agency, which runs most of the schools, and Australia puts money into that process, very controversially, by the way. And there have been 2 major surveys done since October 7, asking the question, do you support the Hamas attack on October 7, and various other questions to measure the support. And roughly 75% support Hamas. And this is one of the side issues which we've called out, and should be of great concern to the average Aussie, and that is that Penny Wong rushed to issue over 2,000 visas to bring people from Gaza, saying that appropriate security screening had been done. Mind you, some of that so-called security screening was less than 24 hours. It is inconceivable that security screening has been properly done, and we will be bringing into this country, inevitably, at a minimum, people who support Hamas, possibly some Hamas operatives, and possibly some who would be prepared to act out. We've had, in the last few weeks, 2 Islamist stabbings in Australia. It is very high risk that amongst those being brought from Gaza would be some people willing to replicate that or worse.
It's absolutely frightening, David. And look, I'll never forget the footage I saw in the wake of October 7 of crowds in Gaza cheering as naked female bodies that had been raped were paraded through the streets, people yelling Allah Akbar. I hope they're not the sort of people that Penny Wong has allowed to get visas into Australia. David, our time's almost gone, but I've been curious as to Qatar's role in this. It's been reported that many of the Hamas leaders live in luxury in Qatar. We have Qatari airliners flying into Australia. Why are we tolerating a country that is harbouring these evil terrorists?
Well, that's a little above my pay grade, but you're right. There are a number of the Hamas leaders that are being hosted in luxury in Qatar. The top few, 3 or 4, have an estimated personal wealth of $11 billion. I've seen a report on that, and it's been published in some of the mainstream media in the United States as well. They've been fleecing foreign aid for years and years. And interestingly, here's another failure. There has been very little public call outside Israel to hold these people to account. There has been no public call that $11 billion should actually be used to help the people who are in real need in Gaza rather than sit in Swiss bank accounts or wherever it is. There has been some pressure on Qatar to expel them, but nothing's happened at this stage.
Yeah, it just seems like double standards. David, just finally, what happens if Hamas is not destroyed? If, for some reason, Israel ends up bowing to the pressure that Joe Biden and Penny Wong are putting on them not to go into Rafah? What happens if Hamas is left intact and those battalions still exist?
Well, I've got a very good friend of mine who's the president of the Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security, one of the big think tanks in Jerusalem. And he coined the phrase describing Israel's strategy with regard to Hamas and Gaza in the past as like mowing the weeds. So, as you know, if you've got weeds growing in your garden and you run a mower over it, okay, they might be out of sight for a while, but they grow back quite quickly. Given the radicalisation that's occurred in the general population, if Hamas is not properly eliminated, then there will be ongoing terrorism without a doubt. And even destroying the infrastructure of Hamas and getting most of the terrorists in Rafah, the IDF will now have to have quite a long-term security presence in Gaza. Israel will not be able to totally withdraw from Gaza for some years.
Well, if history's any guide, David, strong military action in World War II crushed Imperial Japan and its expansionist ambitions. The same with Nazi Germany. I think we need to learn from that, and this military operation must be allowed to succeed. Dr. David Adler, I really appreciate you giving of your time. We stand in solidarity with you and the Jewish community here in Australia and around the world. Appreciate you giving your insights here today for us.
Thank you so much, Lyle. It's tough times, and your support and support of people like you very, very much appreciated.